There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot touch. You know exactly what I am talking about. It is not the tiredness in your legs after a long day, nor the heaviness behind your eyes after too many hours on a screen. This kind is different. It lives somewhere deeper. It lives in the part of you that has spent years absorbing, adjusting, and showing up for everyone around you, often at the direct expense of showing up for yourself. You wake up already bracing before your feet hit the floor. There is a low-level tension running through you. You reach for your phone and feel your stomach tighten before the screen even unlocks because you already know what is waiting. Another request, another crisis, another person who needs something you are not sure you still have left to give. And somewhere underneath all of that giving, underneath all the patience and the fixing and the holding space, there is a quiet voice asking a question you are almost afraid to sit with. How did I end up so empty? That emptiness is not a character flaw. It is not proof that you are too sensitive, too soft, or somehow not built for real relationships. That emptiness is what happens when someone with a deep capacity to feel and to care has never been shown how to protect that capacity. You were handed the gift of empathy and left completely on your own to figure out how not to let it drain you dry. What if everything you have ever been told about being an empath is completely wrong? Not slightly off, not a little exaggerated, but completely, fundamentally backwards. You aren't too sensitive. You were just never taught how to stop absorbing everyone else's emotional pain. Today, we are going to fix that. We are going to explore the raw psychological mechanics of human sensitivity. Drawing on the groundbreaking discoveries of Carl Gustav Jung, we will uncover exactly why you let people drain your energy, how compassion fatigue is literally rewiring your brain, and the precise, step-by-step psychological boundaries you must build to permanently seal the leaks in your life. By the end of this video, your sensitivity will never feel like a burden again. Chapter 1. The Biology of the Radar. To understand why you are constantly drained, you first have to understand the sheer, terrifying accuracy of your own perception. For decades, the wellness industry has sold you a deeply flawed, romanticized story. You have been taught that your sensitivity is a gift you are supposed to share with the world, that your purpose is to hold space, offer healing, extend compassion, and make yourself available to anyone who needs you. But true empathy is not just emotional. It is a highly advanced cognitive and biological data processing system. Every human brain contains mirror neurons, the cells responsible for allowing us to feel what others feel. But in people with high empathic sensitivity, the mirror neuron system is more active, more responsive. When they are in the presence of another person's emotion, grief, anxiety, anger, shame, their nervous system does not just register it, it processes it the same way it would process their own emotion. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who spent over 50 years studying the deepest patterns of the human mind, worked with hundreds of patients who described these exact experiences. They walked into rooms and felt tension before a word was spoken. They felt other people's emotions as if they were happening inside their own bodies. Jung's colleagues dismissed this as delusions or poor boundaries, but Jung recognized that these individuals were perceiving real information about real people through channels that most human nervous systems simply are not tuned to access. Jung identified this ability as emotional field perception. Empaths receive emotions like a radio tower picking up signals from transmitters they did not know were broadcasting. But where does this superpower come from? It is not magic. Most empaths developed this sensitivity in childhood environments where reading the emotional atmosphere of a room was not optional. It was a strict survival skill. If you grew up in an unpredictable home where a parent's moods shifted without warning, your nervous system learned to detect emotional shifts before they became visible. Your safety depended on being able to answer one question accurately and quickly. Is this person safe right now? That radar never turns off. It just keeps running in the background, feeding you data for the rest of your life. You became an extraordinary threat assessor. But Jung discovered a terrifying pattern. 95% of the people with these abilities were using them in ways that slowly destroyed them. They were turning a brilliant navigation system into a chronic bleeding wound. And this leads us directly to the trap that is ruining your life. Chapter 2. Absorption versus perception. Where do empaths go wrong? Jung was incredibly specific about the answers. Empaths are not perceiving these external emotions incorrectly. The problem is what they do next. Instead of recognizing the emotion as external information, they absorb it as their own internal experience. You walk through your entire day collecting other people's anxiety, grief, irritability, and fear, and you carry all of it in your own body. Jung called this absorption instead of perception, and he was emphatic that this was a fundamental misuse of your psychological ability. Because of the default assumption almost every empath carries, that every feeling that arises inside them belongs to them, they confuse receiving with possessing. You walk into a heavy room, feel the weight, and instead of recognizing that you have just walked into someone else's emotional storm, you think, "Why am I suddenly feeling so low? What is wrong with me?" Think about the psychological toll this takes. Research on what psychologists call compassion fatigue shows that consistently absorbing other people's emotional distress without adequate recovery does not just make you tired. It rewires the way your brain processes stress. It reduces your nervous system's ability to return to calm. Over time, people who chronically give without boundaries begin to carry an ambient anxiety that follows them everywhere, a background tension with no single identifiable cause, because it is the accumulated weight of 100 unspoken needs. Jung described a related ability called energetic resonance. Your nervous system synchronizes with whoever you encounter. By the end of an average day, you have absorbed and carried the emotional states of dozens of people. You arrive home feeling wrung out, completely depleted. Jung called this resonance without boundaries, and he identified it as the single fastest path to physical and emotional breakdown in empaths. Your nervous system is a delicate biological instrument. It is not designed to run 15 different emotional programs simultaneously. Chapter 3. The Barter of Compassion. So why do you allow this? Why do you let people drain your energy until you have absolutely nothing left? The uncomfortable truth is that this dynamic continues because it serves a function. Somewhere along the way, you came to understand that your value to the people around you is tied directly to your availability. You learned that being needed is the same thing as being loved, and that if you set a limit or ask for something back, the people you love will leave. This belief was often formed in environments where love genuinely did feel conditional, where being the one who held everything together was how you earned your place. When you feel someone's pain deeply and immediately, something almost automatic happens. You feel responsible for it. You learn to prioritize other people's comfort over your own clarity. This leads to the fawn response, a survival mechanism where you manage conflict by making the other person feel okay, by soothing and smoothing things over to restore the peace. Fawning feels like kindness. It feels like empathy. It feels like the mature, generous thing to do. But underneath it, you are learning that your own discomfort, your own pain, and your own needs are less important than maintaining the other person's equilibrium. You are training the relationship to function in a way where your well-being is never the priority, and manipulative people, narcissists, emotional vampires, people who live in permanent victimhood, have an absolute radar for this. They are drawn to people who have a lot going on emotionally, people who are empathetic, warm, and giving. They are not looking for a partner. They are looking for what Jung called an unconscious container for their rejected emotions. They need someone to absorb their shame, their insecurity, and their self-loathing. You use your brilliant shadow detection to see the wounded child beneath the abusive adult, and you decide that child is worth rescuing. You convert their darkness into a project, a mission, a reason to believe you can be the one person who finally helps this broken human heal. But hear this clearly. Shadow detection is not a rescue mandate. It is a protection mechanism. Understanding exactly why someone is the way they are does not make them safe to be around. Compassion for someone's tragic history does not require you to subject yourself to the devastating consequences of that history playing out in your life. When you give endlessly to people who do not reciprocate, you are not being kind. You are bartering your vital life force for affection, trading your psychological safety for social acceptability. And people who want you available all the time do not actually want you. They want what you provide: validation, company, distraction, emotional comfort. Chapter 4. Boundary 1. The Energy Audit. So how do you break the cycle? How do you seal the leaks and stop the bleeding? You do it by building psychological boundaries. These are not techniques for becoming cold. They are not walls to push people away. They are the structural foundation that makes it possible for you to keep loving, connecting, and showing up fully without disappearing into the people around you. The first boundary you must establish is called the energy audit boundary. This begins not with a confrontation, but with a moment of radical honesty you have with yourself alone. It begins with one question. After I spend time with this person, do I feel more like myself or less? Not better or worse in a vague sense. More like yourself or less. Because relationships that drain you do not just leave you tired, they leave you smaller, quieter inside, with a reduced sense of your own reality, as if time inside someone else's emotional world has blurred the edges of your own. That feeling is not something to rationalize away. That feeling is pure information. Most of the people who drain you are not actively calculating how to extract the most from you. They are simply people who have never been required to manage their own emotional world because you have always been willing to manage it for them. In practice, this boundary means you identify the relationships that consistently leave you smaller. Then, you make an internal decision to stop treating your availability in those relationships as unlimited and unconditional. You stop answering every call the moment it comes in. You practice the sentence, "I care about you, and I do not have the capacity for this conversation right now." You say it without a lengthy justification and without an apology that undermines it. The first few times you do this, it will feel selfish. That discomfort is not evidence you are doing something wrong. It is simply what it feels like when a boundary is placed where there has never been one before. The people who genuinely care about you will adjust. The ones who respond with anger, guilt, or escalating emotional demands are giving you evidence of exactly why the boundary was necessary in the first place. Chapter 5, Boundary 2, the Guilt Narrative, brings us to the second boundary, the one that will undo every other boundary you try to set if you do not master it. It is the guilt narrative boundary. Before healing, guilt was the most effective weapon in the world against you. All anyone had to do was sigh loudly, act disappointed, or say something like, "After everything I have done for you," or "I guess I am just a burden to you." Within seconds, the guilt took over. You were no longer a person making a reasonable request. You were the villain in someone else's story. Here is the distinction that will change how you see this forever. There is a fundamental difference between someone who is genuinely hurt and tells you so honestly, and someone who performs hurt as a way to reverse your behavior. Genuine hurt sounds like vulnerability. It opens a door and invites connection. Guilt used as control sounds like a verdict. It places you on trial and demands surrender. The reason this is so hard for empathic people to navigate is that your nervous system responds to both in exactly the same way. You feel other people's distress as if it were your own. So when someone performs hurt in response to your boundary, your body floods with anxiety, and you immediately move to fix it. You abandon your own truth not because you were wrong, but because you were made to feel wrong. The guilt narrative boundary requires you to sit inside someone else's displeasure without immediately interpreting that displeasure as proof of your own wrongdoing. You must tolerate being temporarily cast as the uncaring one, and critically, you must stop negotiating your limits in the middle of a guilt trip. In the heat of the moment, the temptation to soften and find middle ground is overwhelming. But every time you give in, you are not resolving the conflict. You are teaching that person exactly which lever to pull to get the outcome they want. Hold the boundary, feel the discomfort, let them be disappointed. Their disappointment is not a crisis. It is the relationship adjusting to a new reality in which you are a full participant, not simply a resource. Chapter 6. Conscious return and perceiving without absorbing. To reinforce these boundaries, you must address the biological mechanism of your sensitivity. Jung warned that energetic resonance, synchronizing with everyone around you, will destroy you if left unmanaged. You must install a psychological firewall. The practice Jung developed to fix this is the art of conscious return. You do not resonate with everyone automatically. You choose when to activate this ability, and critically, you develop a consistent practice of returning to your own baseline after any interaction. Every time a strong emotion arises in your body that seems to appear out of thin air, you must stop and ask yourself, is this mine? After holding space for someone, you take a few slow breaths. You visualize their emotional energy returning to them and yours returning to you. You say quietly to yourself, "That was theirs and this is mine." This creates a gap between stimulus and response. When you look at a tree, you perceive the tree, you do not become the tree. Emotional field perception must work the same way. You transform from an overwhelmed sponge into a highly calibrated radar. You see the storm, but you do not let the rain soak your clothes. Chapter 7. Boundary 3. Self-continuity. Finally, we arrive at the deepest boundary of all. If the energy audit protects your external resources and the guilt narrative boundary protects your psychological ground, this third boundary protects the person underneath everything, the actual you. It is the self-continuity boundary. Every person has a continuous inner thread, a stable sense of their own values and identity that persists across different relationships. But for people who have spent years in emotionally draining dynamics, that thread frays slowly across hundreds of small moments. You swallow what you actually think to avoid conflict. You talk yourself out of a gut feeling because the other person seems so certain. Accumulated over years, these small surrenders produce a low-grade hollowness, a persistent sense that something essential is missing because yourself has been quietly left behind. The self-continuity boundary is the non-negotiable commitment to stop leaving yourself behind. When something hurts, you acknowledge it to yourself first before rationalizing why it shouldn't. When you have a need, you treat it as legitimate information rather than an inconvenience. You stop over-explaining your limits. A boundary stated clearly and kindly does not need a lengthy justification. There is a grief that comes with this. When you stop abandoning yourself, some relationships will not survive the shift. Some will tell you that you have changed, or that you are being selfish. But here is the truth that fear cannot account for. The relationships that end when you become whole were never holding the whole of you to begin with. They were holding carefully edited, endlessly available performance. Losing a relationship built on your self-erasure is not the same as losing love. It is the end of an arrangement. Conclusion. The sovereign empath. Jung believed that the highest purpose of psychological work wasn't to make a person more likable or more accommodating. It was to make a person fully real, able to move through the world without betraying what they know to be true about who they are. Your sensitivity was never the problem. The problem was being placed in environments that demanded you betray yourself to belong. The problem was that one of the most valuable things about you was left completely unprotected, open to anyone who needed it, regardless of what it cost you to keep providing it. But you are no longer that terrified child managing the chaos of adults. You are the adult now. You are not a supporting character in other people's stories. You are the main character of your own, and after everything you have been carrying, you are allowed to write yourself that way. When you finally stop trying to rescue everyone else, you rescue yourself. Energy that is protected does not diminish, it deepens. Care that has a boundary around it does not become less loving, it becomes more honest. Stop being the sponge. Become the sovereign. Guard your energy as though it is the most valuable thing you own, because it is. Recognize guilt for the mechanism it is, and refuse to let it decide the shape of your life. And come home to yourself consistently, daily, one small, honest moment at a time. The world doesn't need you to absorb its pain. It needs you to be a presence that sees clearly, feels deeply, and remains always, unmistakably yourself. Now, go reclaim your energy.